Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
We'll know in a very short period of time, but it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
I see issue with that. And again, hey.
You're not going to be able to insult your way to the presidency. That's not going to happen.
I don't know who created Pokemon Go, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put him.
Not good. Believe me, not good.
What's up, everybody? A pleasant good evening to you all. Welcome, Dissidents one and all. This is the DueDissidence podcast. Keaton Weiss here with Russell DiAngelo.
Hello.
Thank you all for being here on this very special Tuesday evening. We carved out a special show for a very special guest who we're going to waste no time introducing. He is a professor and an author of the new book called I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It. Heretical Thoughts on Identity Politics, Cancel Culture, and Academic Freedom. Norman Finkelstein. Norman, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to meet you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Is that you on your shirt?
Yeah, some of my students.
I should get a shirt. We should brand ourselves that way as well. I like it. I dig it. Yeah.
My students made for me, and the back is a hammer and sickle.
Oh, beautiful. Excellent.
All right.
Excellent. Nice. Definitely on brand for you indeed. So we have a lot of questions. This was a big book. We thank you for rescheduling for us. We needed time to finish it. When we ordered it, we didn't realize how thick it was. That is a whole lot of book. It's a shame you didn't print it in hardcover, because then people would get the added value of having a great self-defense weapon. You could really do a lot of damage with that book if it were a hardcover. So maybe you should think about it, because it was a long book, but a great one. I really enjoyed it. And we'll start right at the very beginning. You say in the foreword of the book that the book originated with the famous Harper's letter published in 2020 called A Letter on Justice and Open Debate, which decried cancel culture. So can you describe your reaction to that letter? Why was that sort of the impetus? Why was that the seed of this book? And if you'd like to describe your experience being canceled yourself, you may want to do that as well. It's up to you.
At the time of the publication of that petition or public statement by people on really across the political spectrum, but it was I would say balanced lean towards the conservative and liberal end of the spectrum. And there are a couple of radicals, Professor Chomsky most notably. My publisher at the time, Colin Robinson from Orr Books, he mentioned to me that this petition decrying cancel culture had prompted references to myself and the fact that I had been canceled by corporate culture, mainstream culture, and not by cancel culture, which was allegedly a left-wing thing. And my publisher thought it would be useful for me to comment on the debate. I think his expectation was that I would come out in defense of cancel culture and come out saying the real threat is corporate cancel culture, not left-wing cancel culture. There was a large element in truth in what he had to say. Yeah, corporate cancel culture is a real problem, and let's just say I was in the receiving end of it. I don't want to describe myself as a victim. On the other hand, I couldn't in good conscience defend woke cancel culture, because I think wokeness is vacuous. It's intellectually vacuous. It's politically pernicious. And so that part was not my writ as my publisher expected. I sat down, I read the woke literature, and I concluded that it was worthless. There was a parting of ways between me and my publisher as a result of that, which I'm not really happy about because I like him a lot. I think he's a very decent human being for sure. But it was impossible to see eye to eye on it. I think for various reasons. It was a generational issue. I wrote it for young people, the book, because you say you've read it. I always take that with a grain of salt. Christopher Hitchens was once asked by my publisher, he said, "Did you read this book?" And Hitchens replied, quote, "Let's put it this way, I reviewed it."
Yeah.
I take with a grain of salt that you've read the book, but if you have read the book, you will notice a lot of the book is autobiographical, and I wrote the book in lieu of a memoir of my life, a way of just conveying to young people, don't go down this path. I went down a version of this path in the 1960s, and I've not become a neocon. I've not leapt to the other end of the spectrum. I remain a radical as I was in my youth. However, I made errors, and I want to pass on some of life's wisdom so far as it concerns politics. So part of the reaction of my former publisher, I think, was because it was a generational thing. His generation did not like the book at all. I sent it.
What generation was your publisher?
Mine. We're within a year of each other, and they didn't like anything I had to say about abortion, about affirmative action, about a whole number of things. But I think I don't want in any way disparage my publisher. We were very close friends for many years. I thought part of his reaction, he won't agree with me, I'm sure, but part of his reaction was to take on this book, which attacks so many people on the so-called left, by name, frontally, and brutally. He would end up without a publishing house. He's a left-wing publisher.
Right.
And people take these things personally, like, why did you publish that book? Did you see what Finkelstein wrote about me? And so I think it would have been an act on his part of self-immolation. Literally, well, not literally, but you get the idea, an act of self-immolation if he had published the book. So I felt he would not acknowledge that, I'm sure, but I felt that was part of the reason. The other, as I said, was it was a generational thing. Young people are much more laid back about issues which, from my generation, were litmus test issues. In my generation, the two litmus test issues, at least at the Supreme Court level, were Roe v. Wade and Bakke, the abortion decision and the affirmative action decision. And depending on how you responded to those decisions, that situated you on the political spectrum. If you were anti-Roe, you were a right-winger. If you were pro-Bakke, you were a right-winger. And as I said, those were litmus test issues. However, the new generation, it's different. Now, maybe they're not as urgent about these things because they become too complacent over time. But I teach Supreme Court law. I teach a course called Landmark Supreme Court Cases on Race, Privacy, and Sex. So, of course, we do Bakke and we do Roe. And in the class, we have a very lively debate, discussion, but there's no attempt, as it were, to cancel anyone in the class. People are willing to entertain, if not doubts, they're willing to entertain difference, because these are not litmus test issues for the new generation. So I think those were the two main reasons we had a parting of way over the book: generational, and also financial. I think he would have lost most of his authors if he had published that book.
All right, so building on that, now you say you partly wrote the book. You want to kind of pass on your experience as a radical to the next generation. So you were a Maoist in your youth. You talk about this a lot. And you've said that what can be described as wokeness or cancel culture reminds you of Maoism. I think often leftists, particularly those on the left who consider themselves communists, reflexively reject those kinds of comparisons, not least because they usually come from figures like Jordan Peterson, who they consider right-wing. Can you explain for people who might be confused or even offended by that comparison where the similarities are between identity politics and Maoism?
Well, I think the differences, before I get to the similarity, the differences are so transparent that it would be squandering time. There are no gulags, there are no re-education camps, there are no killings. So we know that, and I'm not going to be so polemical that I'm going to claim there is no difference. The similarities are, as I said in the book, number one, if you were a Maoist, I don't know if you know the era, if you know the temperament, if you know anything about the times. There were many abrupt changes of line in China. And if you were a Maoist, you had to accommodate those abrupt changes in line. So, for example, one day, Lin Biao is Mao's designated heir. The next day, Lin Biao is an enemy of the people, and you have to be anti-Lin Biao. So there was a campaign in China. I lived through it here. I lived through it vicariously. It was called the Campaign to Denounce Lin Biao and Confucius. Now, of course, the most rational, I don't want to accuse the Chinese Communist Party and the Chairman Mao of being insane, but the most rational, sane people, the connection between Lin Biao, the commander of the PLA, People's Liberation Army, and Confucius seemed a little bit tenuous. But we were supposed to all denounce Lin Biao and Confucius. And in the same way, in this woke culture, all sorts of claims which seem to defy common sense and defy also science are now being foisted on people, and you are alleged to be some sort of reactionary Trumpite if you recoil from, say, the expression birthing people or people who menstruate, or you have reservations about whether invasive surgical procedures or experimental drugs should be used on children. And you're immediately branded an enemy of the people if you have any doubts or reservations or qualifications. And that to me is reminiscent of this kind of the irrational component of that Maoist experience. So there to me, as a lived experience, I would say it resembled what I passed through, and which I, by the way, vehemently and fanatically defended. And very respectable people did it as well. To give one example, both of you probably remember Barbara Ehrenreich. Do you know who she is?
No, I don't actually.
Oh, well, Barbara Ehrenreich, you'll remember the book from maybe around 20 years ago. It was called Nickel and Dimed.
Oh yeah, I read. Oh yeah, I read it actually.
Okay, so
yeah.
Barbara Ehrenreich, and Barbara Ehrenreich was a Maoist of sorts in the 1970s and 80s, and she went over to China during the anti-Lin Biao Confucius campaign. And she wrote an article for Monthly Review, which was the eminent socialist journal of the time, defending the campaign. So, hello?
Yeah.
We're here.
Hello?
I think
We're
your
here.
screen just went off, but yeah, we're here. Can you hear us?
Hello?
You hear us?
Can you hear us? We're here. You're on. You're on. There you are. I think your screen went asleep.
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, your screen probably turned off, but we can hear you.
How do you correct that? I guess I just have to hit a button.
Yeah, just hit a button every now and
Yeah,
then.
the
That's all.
timer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that very rational people got caught up in that kind of hysteria, and so I feel it's very similar nowadays. But on the other hand, there are people who are adamant about their leftist bona fides, but won't go along with what seems to be a kind of complete craziness. It's not just that it's crazy, but the unwillingness to brook any kind of doubt about this. Even things like this vast proliferation of the letter X. Jesus Christ, there are 26 letters in the alphabet. Can there be one G or H?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Must everything be X nowadays?
Well, you know, it's funny because I heard you do another interview on another show where the host gave you this line that I thought was a really sort of disingenuous line, which is that, well, yeah, on the left you have loony rhetoric and uncomfortable rhetoric, but the right is actually passing anti-trans legislation. And I thought that was just such a facetious line of argument because it's not just loony rhetoric coming from the left about the trans stuff. It's cancel culture. There's a viciousness to it. There is this real element that they will come after people who cross them on, as you say very, very well, just these really sort of loony linguistic rules that they make that you must abide by without any question whatsoever, or else there are real consequences. It's not just that they talk in an uncomfortable or stilted way. It's they actually seek to punish people who don't conform.
I think that there's the element of seeking to punish those who don't conform. And there's the other element, which is I would call cause and effect. If there's legislation, say, in the Montana state legislature, trying to curb these invasive procedures and these medical drugs, experimental medical drugs like puberty blockers, well, that's because people have already initiated those medical procedures.
Exactly.
So
Right.
who exactly is the cause and who is exactly the effect? So if you read the New York Times on another related issue, namely the question of should trans women be able to compete in professional sports? So they conjure this whole issue as a vast right-wing conspiracy to try to inflate this issue. But who created the issue in the first place?
Right.
Who was insisting that trans women should have the right to participate in female sport events or competitions, meets? So I'm not sure who's, yes, I have no doubt whatsoever that the right wing is trying to capitalize on issues like this. But I also do think it was initiated, we're talking about cause and effect, by folks who have this very adamant position, which at the very least is open to reasonable doubt. Let me just disconnect the phone, allow me. People who have reasonable doubt about whether that should be, that trans women should compete in sports. So whereas the Times casts it as it was initiated by the right, and the same thing, the Montana State Legislature, I don't think that's accurate. So that's why I would also disagree with the person you quoted, namely, on the one hand, as I responded to him, no, on college campuses, there is a lot of repressive, not just repressive, a repressive atmosphere, but there are these diversity, equity, and inclusion apparatchiks who are causing a lot of ideological repression on college campuses. And there's also, apart from that, I think a lot of the troubles which have been capitalized on by the right,
sure thing, yeah,
they were initiated by these woke brigades who, and it does deeply trouble me, they take very inflexible positions on subjects about which they know nothing. These questions about whether trans women should be allowed to compete in female sports, they have a biological element, they have a physiological element. You have to be very knowledgeable about what biological men are able to do versus what biological women are able to do when it comes to sport. And people take these kinds of positions as if it had nothing to do with science. It's just what you want, what you desire. No,
Right.
there's a biological basis for these questions. And I know people won't like what I have to say, and I know I'm not fully informed about the subject. Having said that, I think surgical procedures for children and these experimental drugs, for me, they conjure up, Dr. Mengele with his experiments on children. I don't like the idea of all of these experimental drugs. Nobody's done long-term tests
by definition
on puberty blockers.
Well, yeah, they've never done this to so many children on these premises.
I find it, it causes me to kind of recoil in horror. I had a long discussion. I have two close friends who are pediatricians, and both of them oppose. By the way, they're both very woke, but they oppose the drugs and surgical procedures on minors. And one of them, brilliant young man, he was still adamant these are not decisions that the state should make. These are decisions which parents should make. And he's very wary of state intervention. So I said to him, let me ask you a hypothetical. Back in my day, in the 1950s, if you had homosexual inclinations, your parents would put a lot of pressure on you to go to get shock therapy. That was seen as a way to cure your homosexual inclinations. So I said to him, how would you feel if a state legislature passed a statute prohibiting the use of shock therapy on children who had homosexual inclinations? How would you feel about that? And he was conflicted. So my view is, if you would support a statute like that, which I suspect most woke people would support, then why shouldn't you also support a statute prohibiting the use of these experimental drugs? Nobody knows if they're going to work or not. And nowadays there's quite a lot of evidence that they don't improve the psychological state of those who are suffering from what's called gender dysphoria. So if you would approve the statute prohibiting shock therapy on children to cure them, why shouldn't you also approve a legislative statute that prohibits the use of puberty blockers, let alone, those invasive surgeries? So my bottom line is that things are being imposed which reasonable people can disagree on. And secondly, that real harm can be done, can be inflicted by this, by people who really don't know anything about science, don't know anything about biology, who believe that just by fiat you can create a world in their image, that with sufficient will you can just transform the biology, the physiology, the mental state of people. I think that's it's very crude.
Yeah, so where do you think this came from? Right? I mean, like, where did this come from? Because I always remember, I mean, I came of age during the Bush years, during the Iraq War, and I grew up a liberal. I'm think of myself as more, of a leftist now. But when I grew up, it was the Bush administration really enforcing this conformity, insisting nobody ask a question about anything. It was very simple. If you question the Afghanistan war or the Iraq war, is very simple. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists, and that's it. And I get that same sort of vibe from this sort of new incarnation or this new faction of the left that you spoke about there. Do you have any ideas when this started happening? Why? Where all of a sudden did that come from? Or is it not so all of a sudden? Was I just missing something all along?
In my opinion, first of all, we had a wokeness Well, before even wokeness, the Communist Party, the left, they always had a line, a political line. And if you dissented from that political line, you could be called a bourgeois. You could be called a petty bourgeois. If you radically dissented, you were called a Trotskyite, or any other kind of label was affixed on you. And there's always been on the left, and we shouldn't prettify the past. There's always been on the left a very dogmatic party line, and dissenters were not treated kindly. But there was a very big difference. Let's just move one step forward, and then we'll get to that big difference. And then in the 1980s and 90s, there was the political correctness. And incidentally, political correctness was a form of self-mockery. The term PC came from leftists who were mocking this kind of dogmatic, alleged progressive ideas. So we also had the political correctness. So we had that dogmatic Marxist party line, then we had a political correctness. So how does it differ from the current situation? It's a very big difference. You know what the very big difference is? Because the Democratic Party has absorbed the wokeness, promotes it, and there's real institutional power behind it. I mean, power the Communist Party have. Did it really have the power to cancel people? No. You know, there used to be a claim in Hollywood by right-wingers. There used to be a claim in Hollywood by right-wingers that there was a red list, not just the black list. The black list was the Hollywood right wing, and they claimed there was also a red list. Well, there really wasn't a red list because Reds had no power. It was, if they had power, yes, there would have been a red list. I have no doubt about that. John Wayne would have had a lot of trouble trying to make it. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. But they had no power. And if you're old enough to remember, the political correctness was basically a fad on college campuses. Right. It was marginal. It was easy to mock and also to exploit. Places like the New York Times used to exploit it a lot, say the big threat of political correctness. But it was so marginal. But now, very significant institutions, first of all, politically, the Democratic Party has adopted it. In the media, the New York Times, MSNBC, most of the media, not all, obviously, not Fox News, but a large part of the media have become woke.
Well, also the biggest financial firms like Vanguard, BlackRock, they're pushing this.
Amazon,
ESG scores.
Right.
Yeah. So now there's real institutional power and weight behind the phenomenon. And that's what's changed a lot, because they're bringing to bear real institutional weight to impose this view of the world. So I think when you ask where it came from, I would say in the first place, it came from a Democratic Party which had lost its white worker base for various reasons. In my day, the Democratic Party, its anchor, its core, its power came from the unions. When you thought about the Democratic Party, the first thing you thought about was United Auto Workers, United Steel Workers, United Mine Workers. Now that may mean nothing to you. What's your name? Keaton. It may mean nothing to you, but to my generation, that sent shivers down your spine. Those were very powerful unions, very powerful. and you remember all the names. There was George Meany of the AFL-CIO. There was Walter Reuther of the United Auto Workers. That was the Democratic Party. But obviously, unions don't send shivers down anybody's spine if for no other reason than only 8% of American workers are unionized, and it's mostly public service unions, the steel workers.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, the auto workers, I think it was either today or yesterday, it just broke that they're withholding their endorsement for Joe Biden unless he promises them some, union jobs when it comes to transitioning into the green cars. So that just shows you how it's not a party of unions anymore. Now the UAW is going as far as to say, well, hold on, we're not gonna back you unless you make a certain promise. Yeah.
And you didn't have to do that because they were
right. They knew. Right. It was an arrangement.
Yeah. They were the party.
Right.
So there was a second element. We should be clear about that. So the New Deal was a combination of of FDR. It was a combination of the working class, but also a lot of minorities came to see the Democratic Party as their party. Which is, by the way, just on a tangential note, it's why Jews, even though they became the wealthiest ethno-religious group in the United States, why they stuck by the Democratic Party. Normally with so much wealth, you would think they would have gone over to the Republican Party, but they didn't because they saw the Democratic Party as being hospitable to minorities, and the Republican Party is having a kind of nativist tinge to it, and maybe more than tinge. In any event, what happens? What happens is the balance radically shifts. The working class, like you say, auto workers are angry at Biden or put an ultimatum to Biden. The working class has now gone down, and the minorities and the identity politics has shot up. If you looked at, for example, when I was reading the book, if you looked at 1984, which, okay, I admit, it's a long time ago, but it's not so long ago, and you listen to Mario Cuomo, who was the father of Andrew Cuomo and a force to reckon with in American politics. He was the governor of New York State in that era. And he gave this long, famous speech, a paean to the working class, a song of praise to the working class, and mocking the parasitic rich in the Republican Party. And I even remember I was a friend, you could say, of the greatest living Marxist economist of the era, namely Paul Sweezy, who I'm afraid you don't know either. But I remember even Sweezy, who was a orthodox Marxist economist, even he was moved by Cuomo's speech. But if you go look, as I did in preparation for the book, if you look at the 2016 and 2020 Democratic National Conventions, Cuomo spoke at the one in '84. If you fast forward to 2016 and 2020, there's barely any mention of workers. The only mention comes from the person who was representing Bernie at the convention, namely AOC and another fellow, I can't remember his name. And they mentioned the working class, but as you know, Bernie was the anti-Democrat Democrat. So there was practically no mention, and it all became identity politics. So with that shift, the identity politics agenda, most notably, incidentally, in my opinion, most notably in the Times. I mean, the Times has completely transformed itself. I'll give you one example, which was very striking to me. In the 1990s, I think it was the 90s, so that famous book comes out, The Bell Curve. And The Bell Curve by Richard Herrnstein and Charles Murray. It's a very fat book, but it had one message, even though it's a few pages in the book, just a few pages, but that's what only those few pages, which were what made the book a sensation. Yet again, they prove that black people are stupid. I mean, that's genetically stupid. You can put pretty words on it and use all sorts of qualifications, but that's what they were saying.
Black that's people, what that book became famous for.
Right, that's all. Even though Charles Murray, who's a complete fake, he says, I'm so surprised that that's the only thing they focus on in our book. Well, you're not surprised, because that was the only thing that anyone cared about. The book had like 100 pages of appendices, very mathematical, and nobody knows what the F they're talking about. It was all about black people being stupid, genetically stupid. Why do I mention it? The Times gave it a very positive review. That was the New York Times of that era. A very different place than it is today. There was another book that came out at the same time by a Canadian. He claimed that there was an inverse relationship between brain size and penis size. So if you had a big penis, you were stupid, and if you had a small penis, you were smart. That was the essence of the book. Now, as you can imagine, that came as a very welcome. I mean, it was a sigh of relief for most of the male readers of the New York Times. I'll call it a compensatory sigh of relief.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're right. You can't lose on both.
But the New York Times gave that book a positive review. Can you imagine? And now the New York Times is, in the vanguard of wokeism. So there's a lot.
The Times seems to be trying to figure it out, because a few months ago they actually took a stand against their own staff, who demanded that they make all of these changes because they didn't like that they had actually written an article questioning drugging children. So they tried to do the whole thing. Well, you've got to hire trans staff people, and they basically told them to go fuck themselves. It was very surprising. It was very surprising. It seems like they're trying. My interpretation was they realized what they got themselves into with these people, and what kind of control they're going to exert over editorial discretion, and now they're trying to back away from that.
Well, I think part of it is, if you look at the bellwethers of wokeness, there are people like Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi's gray matter can fit in a thimble with a lot of room left over, but she's a bellwether of wokeness. And you notice in like the last month, when they start to rewrite all of these classic books, try to make Agatha Christie and James Bond, trying to make them politically correct. We had reached a new point of lunacy. Whoopi has her finger in the air. She knows when this is a bridge too far. So she started to denounce this latest episode in the woke hysteria. So I think what you describe is part of the recognition that wokeness is losing its luster, and as a lot of people think, this has just gone berserk.
All right. Well, I want to get to a piece of the book here, because you devote an entire chapter to Robin DiAngelo, and you pull several quotes from her famous book, of course, White Fragility. But you write about her here. I will prove to you I read at least this page. In DiAngelo's dystopian conjuring, you must ever be on guard, not against Big Brother, but against your inner racist demon that, unbeknownst to you and beyond your control, lurks in the ebony-most recesses of your mind, lying at the ready to leap forth and, like a bigoted neutron bomb, stamp out of existence every black person in its proximity. And yet it's DiAngelo's morbid obsessive diagnosis of racism. It's the psychopathic phantasmagoria in which she has ensconced herself and wants to corral the rest of us that renders its eradication impossible. And this sort of jives with one of the book's main themes, which is that wokeness and identity politics ultimately serve neoliberalism and undermine a more class-oriented left sort of organizing. And so what, in your opinion, is the appeal of DiAngelo's books? Why was it such a sensation? Is it for that reason? And when you look at that question of redirecting people's critiques of the system to critiques of themselves and their peers?
Well, the first thing to say about DiAngelo's book is it's a wonderful device for dividing working people. Now, I don't want to in any way pretend that there isn't racism aplenty among probably all white people. I have no problem saying that. I quote in the book what Martin Luther King once said. He said, "I've regrettably come to the conclusion that most white people are racist." I think that's true. I don't have a problem saying that. The problem is what you do with it. It's not, as I wrote the other day to a correspondent who you would know by name, and so I won't, I'll forego mentioning his name. I said to him, it's not a question of whether white people carry prejudices. Of course they do. How could you're born in the United States. We carry prejudices about 1,000 different things. Is there a non-Jew who doesn't carry a prejudice about Jews being cheap? Is there one? No, I don't think there is, frankly. Is there anyone who doesn't carry prejudices when they see a woman who's got blonde hair and large breasts? No, these are prejudices everybody carries. The question is what you do with them. Do you fight them, or do your best to fight them? Fight them in how you practically acquit yourself in life? Or do you acquiesce in them? Or do you revel in them? Now, there are some who revel in them. I think people like that University of Pennsylvania professor Amy Wax, who just she just can't get over how stupid black people are. I mean, I think it has seized her
Yeah, I've
soul.
heard you speak about that case, yeah.
Yeah. And then there are those who are aware, but we all know how difficult it is to control the conscious, the unconscious, the subconscious, and all those other regions of the mind. And it's not within our power to control them. And so we just go about our lives doing our best to make the world a better place and to fight those demons as a practical matter, not in one of Robin DiAngelo's sessions, but as a practical matter. You encourage students who need the encouragement. You certainly don't discourage students who happen not to be white and Jewish. You don't discourage them. You try to acquit yourself. What does Robin DiAngelo do? Well, number one, she has this weird idea that you can, as a popular expression of, you can interrupt racism. I don't know, what does it mean to interrupt racism? First of all, according to her, it's so deeply entrenched that I can't imagine it's entrenched in every aspect of our being. There's no, as it's called nowadays, there's no safe space from racism. Your every gesture, your every thought, your every intonation, it's all saturated with racism. So how can you interrupt it? I don't know. I said it's like holding up, putting a twig on a train track to try to stop a supersonic locomotive coming your way. I don't see how you can interrupt it. Doesn't seem to make any sense to me. It's, according to her, it's automatic. You have no control over it. So how can you interrupt it? I think it's a nice way to make money to conduct these sessions, but I don't see how it does anything to interrupt, whatever that means, racism. But there's another thing. Robin DiAngelo says that all white people are racist to the core, and there's no other aspect to their being, no other facet to their being. And she says, white people think that black people are apes and monkeys and gorillas. That's what she said. I had to think to myself, well, since you're white, Robin, you must be thinking that also. And maybe you're projecting your own sinful thoughts on others, but let's leave that aside. So we live in a time where certain of the tendencies that Marxists had anticipated, this kind of homogenization of the have-nots. So white young people, they're just doing a notch better than black people, a notch better. There's been a real homogenization of the have-nots. It's not 99%. It's not a perfect homogenization. It's uneven, but as I say, the differences are relatively smaller now. So there's real possibility of a transnational working class unity. And you saw that at play during the George Floyd demonstrations, which began roughly 50% white, 50% black. Black started to drop out around the second week, and eventually it became like 70-30. But you saw a real solidarity. It was real. I was in those demonstrations.
Yeah, you spoke about, you were there, yeah.
And it was a real solidarity. Well, what does Robin DiAngelo do? Just at the moment that there's a real possibility for a transnational working class unity, she plants in the idea of black people. Don't trust those whites. Don't trust them. They think you're apes and monkeys and gorillas. Don't trust them.
Yeah, it's so fun to mention. Sorry, go ahead.
It's so perfect for the corporate elite to be transmitting the message, don't trust white workers, don't trust your white neighbors. They may be marching with you in defense of George Floyd and against killer cops, but they really, if you go inside, like I know white people, says Robin DiAngelo. Robin DiAngelo, she's really down with the hood. She's so down with the hood. She says, black people, they trust me. She's Sister Robin. They trust her. And she knows white people, and she's telling all these black people, don't trust them, except me. You can trust me. She tells us, you can trust me. You know, I'm down with the hood.
Well, Russell told me a great story. Yeah, go ahead. You told me a story earlier today about this. Yeah.
So
which one?
About Martin Luther King, Robin DiAngelo's interpretation of the "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's fascinating because you have, on the one hand, and you talk a lot about this in your book, how these premises just contradict themselves all over the place. So on the one hand, you're not supposed to talk for black people, which fair enough. And then Robin DiAngelo, this wealthy white woman, goes ahead and explains what Martin Luther King really meant. We've all been getting it wrong since 1963. She explains that he wasn't actually advocating what you thought he was advocating when he discusses content of their character. And also you mentioned this in the book also. She claims that white people understand the story of Jackie Robinson not as a triumph over racism, but as the first black person who was good enough to play for whites, which I don't know if there's a white person on the planet who interprets Jackie Robinson's story that way.
I said that's probably true. Have you read the KKK Guide to America?
That's what she said in the book, yes. Taibbi wrote a great article about her follow-up to White Fragility, where, in keeping with what you're saying about her projecting, I wholly agree with you. She tells a story about how she was at some kind of function and there was a table of black people and there was a table of white people. And she went to the white people because she felt more comfortable. And I thought about that and I said, you know, I honestly would not have felt that way. And particularly if there was a class difference and the black table was closer to my class, not assuming that would have been the case, but if it was, I probably would have sat there. So how much is this about white people and how much is this about you and your hangups and your experience? You're just assuming that you're so good that there can't be white people who are better than you are, right? If this is true of you, it must be true of whites.
She says, you can go through a law school and a graduate school and never hear any word about racism. That's what she said. Never hear anything about racism. You can go through graduate school and law school. And I said in the book, that's probably true if you cut all your classes or you were on crack while you were in class. Just so that's one of the things that really kind of boggles the mind. And I don't want to sound too pious. I don't want to sound too aloof. But you read these statements which are so crackpot. I'll go through a quick summary. You have Kimberly Crenshaw, Ms. Intersectionality. And she says, Black women suffer from 3 oppressions. Okay? Oppression number 1, they're Black. And then there's the second oppression, they're women. Okay, so far, so good. Rosa Luxemburg said the same thing. You get a pass. Not very original, I'm afraid to say, Kimberly, but I'll at least give you a check. Then she says, Black women suffer from a third oppression. What's that oppression? That they're Black women. So, of course, you're wondering, well, what's the difference between you're oppressed because you're Black, okay, check. You're oppressed because you're a woman, check. But then you say there's a third oppression. You're oppressed because you're a Black woman. Like, you've mutated, because you're a Black woman, you've mutated, literally, I'm not making this up, into a third oppression. So, of course, that's important in order to win the oppression sweepstakes and to get to leap to the head of the cube when it comes to applying for a job, because you get 3 oppressions. But the third oppression doesn't make any sense. My friend, there's a very long footnote in that chapter. A friend of mine, Sanjeev Mahajan, he's a mathematician. And he looked at that claim by Kimberly Crenshaw, and he said, well, if you're a Black and you're a woman, and there's a third oppression that you're a Black woman, well, then he said there's a fourth oppression. If you're a Black woman and being Black and a woman is also oppression, and Black woman is an oppression, then if you start these oppressions, and he goes through it very carefully, mathematically, I asked him to write that footnote, it ends up that everyone, literally everyone, has an infinite number of oppressions.
Yeah, because you keep bundling.
Right. Yeah, that's not hyperbole. As a mathematical fact, Keaton seems to understand this concept. I wasn't too clear on it.
I understand what he's saying. Yeah.
Everyone has an infinite number of oppressions. It's completely bonkers, but it has a very utilitarian effect. It gives you the advantage in the oppression sweepstakes, which is not just the sweepstakes. It means getting positions of power.
Right.
Because
Yeah, I can make a nice whiteboard graphic of that for your next book if you need me to put a footnote. I'll do a representation.
There's the cover.
Yeah.
And because wokeness is not about redistributing wealth, it's about what they call ending the disparities.
Right.
And there's only one disparity that they care about, only one. There are not enough persons of color or sexual minorities in the ruling elite.
Right, exactly. They want diversity in the 1%, yeah.
They don't care about diversity among workers, because how much difference does it make if you're white or black in terms of salary? Really not that much. I mean, the calculations have been done. It's not very significant. Where it is significant is in the 1% blacks versus the 1% whites. Then there's a very big disparity. So wokeness is not about redistributing the wealth. Wokeness is about redistributing the ruling elite to include representative members of minorities. But there's a catch. If you can come up with a new minority, you could demand representation for yourself. So if you have 4, 5, 10 oppression, belong to 4, 5, 10 oppressed groups, then you could demand representation for your special oppression. If you don't get it, well, they're privileging
Right.
their oppression over my oppression. So the more you can multiply the number of your oppressions, the more you can claim that you deserve a placemat at the table of that 1%. So that's Kimberly Crenshaw. Then you take Robin DiAngelo, we already took.
Well, you know what? My next question is about Kendi, who you
take
spend
Kendi,
a lot of time on. Let me ask, because I want to read some from your book.
Yeah, I'll just make one brief comment about Kendi, and we get into him because I would like to talk about him. So Kendi, his whole book consists of affixing the label racist or anti-racist on the whole gallery of African Americans, the course of African American history since the beginning, as he calls it. And he ends up saying Frederick Douglass, the great figure of 19th century African American, the struggle against slavery. Mm-hmm. Frederick Douglass, he's a racist. Richard Wright, the novelist, he's a racist. Everybody's a racist except Angela Davis, Zora Neale Hurston, Eldridge Cleaver, probably a third of, I don't know, another, and Kanye West. Yeah. Everybody else is a racist. Like, this is a loony. You hear me? It's completely lunatic. Whatever shortcomings, blind spots people like Douglass had, everybody has shortcomings and blind spots. But racist, Frederick Douglass, racist, no. Sorry, you lose me there. You lose me there. And I'll just give one last example, and then I'd like to get back to Kendi with you. You take Barack Obama. Woke people loved. Now he's not so popular, but loved white.
He's popular with them.
Right, he's popular with them because it's the Democratic Party, and they need it. Right. So Barack Obama, they tell you, you read Lawrence Tribe or David Remnick, Mr. Woke, the editor of the New Yorker magazine. So they tell me, you read them, Barack Obama, he's not just brilliant. Barack Obama, he understands relativity. That's what we're told. He understands quantum mechanics. Okay, that's what Lawrence Tribe says. That's what David Remnick reports. Now, Barack Obama, so far as we know, because he hasn't released his college transcripts, we know he took one course in science at Columbia University. One. It was a course which was dubbed by students. It was called Physics for Poets. So you get the idea. It's somebody who has to get their science requirement out of the way. So they take physics for poets. So far as we know, he didn't take any math courses. Any. But he knows relativity. And David Remnick said he talked about Einstein and relativity with Lawrence Tribe. Is that believable? Is that credible? I was once in a car ride with Noam Chomsky. You don't make small talk with Professor Chomsky, but at least you can ask questions and not completely humiliate yourself. So one day I asked him, I said, Professor Chomsky, what's your opinion of Einstein's theory of relativity? Is it everything that's said, or is there an element of hype? I was curious, okay? So he turned to me and he said, Norman, the first thing to say is there are only a handful of people in the world who understand the theory of relativity, okay? Only a handful among the 8 billion denizens of the planet, a handful understand it. But to believe Tribe, Lawrence Tribe, he was the constitutional professor at Harvard Law School, to believe Tribe, to believe David Remnick, Barack Obama, who never took a college-level math course, and the closest he came to a science course was Physics for Poets. He understood relativity. That's the kind of lunacy of woke culture. It defies elementary common sense.
It has a lot of elements of religion, really.
Birthing people, menopausal people. What does that mean? I don't get it. I mean, I was invited to many bar mitzvahs, the Jewish tradition. I was invited to many bar mitzvahs. Okay, that's when a male turns 13. Now, it's true as I got older, I became less popular because of my views on various subjects like Israel, Palestine. But none of my male friends invited me to their baby showers. They didn't have babies. Female friends invited me to their baby showers, but male friends did not invite me to their baby showers. What is birthing people? None of my male friends gave birth to a child. It's like Barack Obama knows relativity. Kimberly Crenshaw says a Black woman suffers 3 oppressions. I don't know, where does this Ibram X. Kendi says Frederick Douglass was a racist.
Well, look, it's all virtue.
Lose your mind.
Well, this is where the term virtue signaling comes from, because that's the end. The end is just to signal your virtue, right? It's not about attaching something to a reality. It's not about attaching something to any tangible political aim, right? It's all one-upsmanship. That's, as your friend put it there with his mathematical theory of victimhood or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's just about one-upping whoever's next to you, right? Whoever might get out in front of you.
I think it's a combination of things. I think for white liberals, it's a way of showing how woke you are, or how cutting edge you are, how radical you are.
Exactly.
Without having to make any sacrifices.
That's why it's gained so much traction, because it serves the interests of powerful elites.
Yeah, in my day, when white liberals wanted to show how hip they were, Now you may take offense at this, but I'll risk it. I'll risk. Many people take offense. They always would say, "I love jazz. I love jazz." It was showing how hip they were, how down with black people they were. If you remember people you won't remember, people like Nat Hentoff, who wrote for the left-wing magazine, The Village Voice. And if you were to Google it now, just Google Nat Hentoff Jazz Club, and you'll see him with this big grin in his face, and he's in the jazz club. It was, you go to the Village, like the Village Vanguard, and you listen to jazz. And this wokeness is like jazz in my generation. It shows how down with the hood you are. And it costs you absolutely nothing. It's a way to be radical without having to pay any price whatsoever. Nowadays.
Well, you've spoken about this very well, where you talk about part of being on the left has meant historically a willingness to sacrifice. People give their lives to be on the left. Right.
People not only made huge sacrifices in career, in life, losing their life.
Yeah, of course.
It was another element of it, which I find very striking. You never were allowed, and you never even wanted to wallow in any kind of self-pity. You had given yourself over to the cause. You recognized the sacrifices that attended giving yourself over to the cause, and you just accepted it. That was part of being on the left. I was just talking to a young friend of mine, Jamie Stern Weiner, a brilliant young man in the UK, and I was commenting to him that I was reading Rosa Luxemburg's letters for the nth time. And Rosa Luxemburg, I assume you know who she is.
Sure.
Yes.
Rosa spent a lot of time in prison, and especially at the beginning of World War I. She spent 2.5 years in prison because, part of being a leftist, she opposed German entry into the war, like Karl Liebknecht. You give speeches opposing German entry, and you go to jail. And she spent 2.5 years in jail. And she was a voluminous correspondent. One of her biographers, her best-known biographer, Nettle, he said, when you read her correspondence, you wonder how she had time to do anything else. It seems like she was writing letters all day. And what was striking about the letters is, number one, never once uttering a single word of complaint about being in jail. It never, ever even is hinted at. That was part of the price of the cause. You don't complain about it. It comes with the turf.
Right.
And the other thing that was very striking, Rosa Luxemburg knew botany, she knew geology. She had a very wide mental range. She would choose a topic and then conquer it. She was by professional training, she was an economist. She was one of the first women in the world to get a PhD in economics. But her range was quite spectacular, as that whole generation of Marxists. That was the peak, the beginning of the 20th century. What struck me belatedly when I was reading the letters, she talks about the birds. She talks about the mice. She talks about any sentient life around her. But you know what? She never talks about a living being around her. No contact with inmates. No contact with guards. She's completely isolated. And it's 2.5 years, never a complaint. Of course, I wonder how I would have held up under those conditions. Knowing myself, I would have been wallowing in self-pity after around 5 minutes. It's,
You would have at least found someone to talk to. Right.
I'm not sure. I've not even had success being outside prison on that count.
All right.
So in light of that tradition, it's so pitiful, so impoverished what's become of what's called the left in our country. The idea that somehow it's radical to go skinny dipping with Angela Davis at Martha's Vineyard, or Angela herself starting up a radical fashion line, and all of them, all these woke people denouncing Bernie and his campaign for being weak on racism, a campaign that offered the prospect of significantly improving the lives of ordinary people, most especially Black people. Medicare for all, abolish student tuition, Green New Deal. And the idea that he became the object of ridicule and denunciation.
Well, you mentioned in your book that Angela Davis attacked him in 2020 for being bad on race.
Yeah.
This former communist.
Right. But a radical fashion line, that's going to really improve the lives of Black people.
All right, which brings us to Mr. Kendi.
Yeah.
All right, so you reserve special scorn in your book, I must say, for Ibram X. Kendi, who, as you point out, has argued that racism is rooted in the economic advantages of racism and not in unreasoning hate or ignorance, thereby rendering any attempt to ameliorate racism through persuasion doomed to failure.
Yeah.
You then question why, given that he's chosen to get very wealthy, lecturing white people about race. So proving that, once again, that we did read it. I'm going to read a little bit from your work here.
I'm very impressed. We're almost at 2 full pages.
Hey, this is pretty deep into the book here. It perplexes why Kendi lectures before overwhelmingly white woke audiences across the country. He elected to teach and preside over an anti-racist research center at overwhelmingly white Boston University, and he's been a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at the premier bastion of white intellectual culture, Harvard University. It must be a mutually mortifying experience, as his white interlocutors can't possibly comprehend him, and he can't possibly translate the inherently alien African, quote, philosophies and inner values that inform his contemplations. How, incidentally, could the MacArthur Foundation's white officers bestow upon Kendi a Genius Award if they were constitutionally incapable of grasping his putative genius? It confounds why he would cavil, got a little Yiddish there, Norm, that he won the Alabaster White National Book Award and that he is published in white, deep structured journals such as The Atlantic and the New York Times. Forgive the heretical thought, but one gets the distinct impression that this ferocious anti-assimilationist reckons white culture to be superior. And didn't he, per many an enterprising assimilationist, bid adieu to, quote, nearly everything that he is and that is intrinsic to his being when he left behind his, quote, black space, black bodies, black thoughts, black cultures, black histories, black neighborhood, and headed off for white space body thoughts? He proudly boasts of his Florida A&M University pedigree. Why then didn't this exemplary anti-racist locate his anti-racist research center, funded to the tune of $10 million by then Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, at Florida A&M or another of the historically black colleges and universities? I think that is a very good question. Why do you think, let me just finish. Why do you think such patently absurd and intellectually bankrupt figures as Kendi, DiAngelo, and Hannah Nicole Jones, who you also call out as having made $1 million last year lecturing in spite of the ahistorical nature of her 1619 project, have been able to gain such cultural power? And do you believe the race-hustling industrial complex will face an emperor no-clothes reckoning eventually?
Well, basically, first of all, they're stupid, and the white ruling elites like stupid blacks around them. I don't think you taking it just as a comparison. It was very striking to me that the Barack Obama administration, they found a place for Reverend Al Sharpton, who's just this kind of complete hustler. He's preposterous in his pretense to being anything other than a hustler. People like Valerie Jarrett in Obama administration, David Axelrod, Obama's campaign strategist, they all sing the praises of Al Sharpton, or as we called him, Reverend Al, Rev Al, but they couldn't find a place for Cornel West.
Yeah, I was just going to say, no love for Cornel West, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's very strange, you would think. Cornel West is, by any reckoning, a very impressive scholar, academic, and very accomplished. They couldn't find a place for him. And I think part of the reason they couldn't find Obama and his people is because Cornell is too smart. And he would be a problem for them. He's an independent thinker. Right. Cornell is not shy to challenge Obama.
No, he got on his bad side. Yeah. I mean, as soon as spring of 2009, Cornel West is already coming out saying, he's letting us down.
And had he been in the Obama administration, you could be sure at a certain point he's going to say, Brother Barack, I really don't agree with that. And he would have very good reasons for not agreeing. Right. And so he wasn't a useful idiot for Obama. So part of it is, I do believe that they promote stupid black people. It confirms, it affirms all of their prejudices. They like stupid black people around them so they can affirm that black people are stupid, which is what most of these woke liberals actually think. So that's
you mentioned that Obama, I didn't even know this, hired 8 white guys to write all of his speeches.
Yeah, because he thinks black people are stupid himself. He does. He had 8 speechwriters. Now, when you're president, you have to attend a lot of these public events that involve comedy, like that national press meeting, and there were several
press awards dinner,
and the Gridiron Award.
Yeah.
So you need comic writers as part of your stable of writers. Now you would think, okay, black people are stupid, so they can't do serious speeches. But certainly, you could hire a black person who knows comic writing. No, they were all white. You didn't hire one black, even not one black speechwriter, not even to do comedy sketches. That's the entrenched racism of the woke culture. White liberals, anybody who knows white liberals, that's not a surprise. So part of it is because they're stupid. They don't want people who can think for themselves. And part of it is because they're absolutely harmless. Right. They don't talk about redistributing wealth. They don't talk about, and they're not just harmless, but in moments of truth, like when the Bernie Sanders candidacy materialized, they were very useful to attacking Bernie and stopping that insurgency from below. And then they also they have no relevance or consequence to what's happening in the real world. So Angela Davis, she goes around. She has a road show. It's called Prison Abolitionism. Well, prison abolitionism is a nice idea. I'm all for prison abolitionism. But if, for example, because Angela claims to be a not Marxist, but a leftist, she was a Marxist. If you read Lenin's State and Revolution, a classic work of her tradition and also my own, Lenin says that the special apparatuses of repression, which include jails, prisons, they won't disappear until the highest stages of communism. Now, one thing we can agree on is we're very far from the highest stage of communism in the United States at the present moment, okay? So, abolishing prisons is a way down the road. So when you go around talking about abolishing prisons, I mean, it's a great item on Martha's Vineyard. Angela Davis to give a lecture on abolishing prisons. Everybody in Martha's Vineyard is very excited, you know. And they're all dressed to the nines. Well, not really dressed to the nines. They're dressed probably understated because it's Angela Davis, and this is a we're down with the hood evening, so we have to not flaunt our wealth. And you talk about it, what does it have to do with anything? You know, it's like if you read Marx, in the highest stage of communism, we're going to abolish money. Okay, money will be abolished, eliminated. So we're facing an economic crisis now, correct? Everybody knows that the stagnation in wages, the inflation, stagnation of there's a major economic crisis. So if you come along and you were to say, I have the solution. I have the solution to all the problems plaguing our economy. Really? What's your solution? Abolish money. It's right there in Marx, abolish money. Oh, obviously, you're a crackpot. Well, I dare say, talking about abolishing prisons at the present moment is as crackpot as talking about abolishing money to solve the economic problems plaguing our society. These are just subjects that give you a frisson, a chill, that you're so radical. They have nothing whatever to do with the real world. They're completely irrelevant. And that's why these people get such a hearing. It was the same thing, I'm sorry to say, with defund the police. What does defund the police mean? Does it mean when I pick up the phone and I dial 911, I'm going to get a dial tone? I don't think most people want that. I mean, we could disagree, but I think most people, including most black people, as awful as cops can be, you would like that when you dial 911, somebody answers the phone.
Well, that's always a problem for those efforts. Whenever they poll black people, they're never for it.
Right. It was the same thing, with Latinx. The problem, AOC, is 97% of Latino people don't like it. Yeah. Don't want to be called Latinx because if you're an ethnic group, why would you want to sound like a porn site? Yeah.
Well. Also, you're not supposed to tell other. You're not supposed to tell other cultures. You're not supposed to judge other cultures. You're telling them their language is sexist. You're telling them they have to change their language.
AOC, why not Latin XXX? I mean, if we're going down the X lane, why not Latin XXX?
Okay, so I would like to posit this because I understand what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. And we've talked about this. Sorry, go ahead.
Before you continue, I just have to explain one point in the passage that Russell read from my book. These passages, they amuse me. I don't know if they amuse anyone else. My late mother used to say, Norman, there's a problem when you're the only one laughing at your jokes. Well, actually, I find my jokes very funny. I don't care what anyone else thinks.
Well, yeah, no.
But when you read Kendi, he says black people, these are not my words. They think differently than white people. They process information differently. They have what he calls the African deep structures. And then he says black people have their own language. They think in their own language. It's called Ebonics. It's a complete language, and that's how black people think. So, okay, that's not been my experience. I've had African American students, and they seem to understand what I say. It doesn't seem to be a deep structure obstacle there.
Right.
But let's say it's true. So then, why are you lecturing before white people? It doesn't make any sense. It's like me lecturing the Chinese Communist Party. They know no English, and I don't know Chinese. I don't know any Chinese.
Right.
I'm not going to understand the word I'm saying. So why are you lecturing white people? I don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, the most literal sense of the word, it makes no sense what they're saying. It's like Obama with the relativity. And I say, it's like you're entering this kind of Alice in Wonderland world where everything is termed topsy-turvy. None of this makes any sense unless you suspend your capacity for judgment. You have to put your capacity for judgment in suspension mode to take any of this seriously. And you almost feel like at some level it's a con that you have to play along with things which are completely ridiculous.
Well, I think what's important, I mean, just for me, I think what you're saying is true. And I also do think it is important, and perhaps this is asking too much of just the general population to be able to do this. But I think it's important, pardon me, to sort of compartmentalize what is doable in the here and now in the short term, and what kind of vision you should articulate for a world that you want to see. I think it's very important to keep a sort of political vision in mind. So I think we should talk seriously about a world beyond prison, a world beyond policing, even, probably a world beyond money. I think we should be able to have those conversations. I think it's very important to articulate those aspirations. At the same time, you should be able to talk about that. You should also not be so rigid in your insistence that these are doable tomorrow under the current political circumstances, because under those circumstances, under capitalist hegemony, frankly, they're not possible. It cannot happen, right? And so I think there's a bit of nuance that perhaps is just not able to be translated or mass marketed in a way that causes a lot of the frustration you were just talking about there. But on the other hand, I do think it's important to have this aspirational vision of a world that we want to create. I mean, I think it's very important for a left movement to have that in its sights.
Well, here's my problem with that. You have an important platform. You're speaking at the University of South Carolina. I'm referring loud to Angela. You refer.
I was about to say, this is not an important platform that we're on now. We do not, Russell and I do not have an important platform.
You're speaking at University.
Important to us.
Yeah.
You're speaking at the
We speak to a very unintelligent but thankfully well-endowed audience, according to what you said. So.
You're speaking at University of Pennsylvania. Angela gets invitations everywhere. And if you're a political actor, if you're a radical, forget about fancy terms like political actor, what do you do with your time? What do you do with this opportunity? You talk about the lower and higher stage of communism? Is that what you do? Is that what Lenin would do? Is that what
I understand what you're saying. I think it's
what Rosa Luxemburg would do? Yes, Rosa Luxemburg taught in the German Social Democratic Party school. They had a school, not unusual. And there she taught economics, and she taught economic history, and she taught communism. Okay? But that's in a school. When she went out to speak to masses of people at rallies, demonstrations, she talked about the injustices of the capitalist system, and she traced them back to the system of private profit and talked about trying to build a better society. Okay, they were very practical. When the Bolsheviks come to power in Russia, forgive me for bringing that up. I know it's ancient history covered in cobwebs. But when they came into power in Russia, did they come into power on slogans like "Long live communism"? No, they came into power. You know what their slogan was? Bread, peace, land.
Right.
Bread for the starving workers, peace for the soldiers at war, land for the land-starved peasants. Bread, peace, land. Now, I think prison abolitionism is a wonderful subject at a party school. And if you're a philosophy professor, it's a wonderful subject for a graduate seminar. No doubt about that. But is that what a radical does? And I ask you a second question. Let's say Angela gave lectures on how we have to end the capitalist system. We have to end the exploitation of workers and the system of exploitation, and we have to get rid of the system. Angela charges $50,000. That's her speaking fee.
Yeah.
Per speech? Per speech?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
We tried to get her for
you
this
could-
show. You were cheaper, so we found you instead.
Actually, I don't take offense at that.
No.
Actually, I would be ashamed to charge that kind of money for a radical audience.
Well, your book is only $22 for a college professor, and a book that size, you could have gotten what? I mean, you guys usually charge $400 or $500 for your books.
Yeah, per book.
Yeah.
A friend of mine at Harvard, he was in the Palestine Solidarity Committee, and he wanted to invite Angela to speak for a day devoted to Black Palestinian solidarity, to, as they say in the left, make the connection, okay, between Black oppression and Palestinian oppression. She wrote back, said, sure, for $35,000.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a long way from the revolution, huh?
I would be ashamed to say that. I would.
That's amazing.
I'd be ashamed to say.
Well, yeah. Look, I didn't mean what I said as a defense of her.
So,
but sorry, go ahead.
No, I could see the point you're making, but if you recall, I don't know how well versed you are in Marx, but Marx once said, "I don't write recipes for the future." You know, when he was asked, "Why don't you talk?"
But this is the big difference. It's
what
like
would communism be like. He said, "I don't know what they're going to be like. You can give hints, anticipations, vague ideas, what Rosa Luxemburg called signposts. You can give a vague idea of," she said, "you can give signposts and you can talk about the negatives, like what has to be eliminated, like private property has to be eliminated. But in terms of the positives, what will replace it," she said, "we really don't know. So we have to make sure," she said, "to have freedom of speech so there can be free exchange of ideas about how to move forward." That was one of her, as it were, utilitarian arguments for freedom of speech. So the Marxist tradition, it really doesn't talk much about socialism per se or communism per se. They talk about the capitalist system, its ruthless exploitation, and why it needs to be eliminated. Okay?
Sure.
Now, here's a simple question for you. Wherever Angela goes, and I don't want to pick on Angela, actually, I like her, I liked her very much. I highly respected her, which is kind of what makes me angry at what she became. I was, as a teenager, I used to give out on Christmas, 1970, I gave out Angela Davis Christmas cards when she was in jail. I was a nut, but at least all my friends thought I was nuts. So I think it was Norman, Angela Davis Christmas cards. Cuckoo. Okay.
I'm a tour guide here in New York. I take people to the place that she was held in prison.
Right. Women's House of Detention.
Exactly. By the Jefferson Market Library.
Yeah, she was 14 months in prison. In any event, so here's a question to you. So when she's speaking at the University of South Carolina, she's introduced by this woman with this big shock of blonde hair, looks like Jane Mansfield, if you know who that is. And she's the second richest woman in South Carolina. She's a billionaire. Mm-hmm. And this person, only half jokingly, she's saying how much she and Angela have in common. This Southern Belle billionaire, SBB we'll call her, Southern Belle billionaire, how much she and Angela have in common. Now, if George Soros, they're both women, granted. But if George Soros introduced me somewhere, hypothetical, and he talked about what we had in common, I think to myself, okay, we're both Jewish. But I think that's where it ends.
All right.
Well, it would begin to worry me if he thought we had a lot in common. And I think if I were true to my principles, I would turn to him and say, George, I'm not sure how much we have in common because I want to get rid of people like you. I think you're a parasite. I think you have way too much money, way too much power, and I think you're destroying humanity. And you're making the lives of many people quite miserable. Now, why do I bring that up? Because you talked about... Well,
I think you just blew your invitation to the next Davos gathering there, Norm.
Well, that's the whole point. You see, that's the whole point.
Angela, sure, but Angela Davis,
knows that if she says certain things, she won't get those invitations.
Well, sure, but you're talking about people who, when the real game was on the line, they weren't down for it. Look, I think of the major short-term struggle of my time as an older millennial were those two Bernie campaigns, right? And I articulated that as such. For all of Bernie's flaws, I said this is our last chance to fast-track a lot of the policy items that we think, as people on the left, are very much needed. That's why I went all in for both of those campaigns. So during those campaigns, I think it absolutely makes sense to stick to bread and butter issues, nuts and bolts, blocking, tackling, politics, Machiavellian, win, 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 keep it very reality-centered, right? Now, when I sell a campaign as a once-in-a-lifetime, or at the very least a once-in-a-generation opportunity, I'm not bluffing. When I talk about a campaign in that way, I mean it. So now that campaign is lost, the way I see it, and I talk about this on the show a lot, not to depress people, but to liberate people's minds in a certain way, when I say, look, for my generation, it's over. Like, it's lost. My generation is not going to have as good a life, at least economically speaking, as a generation that came prior. That's gone. That's out the window. It's too late for us. I have two kids. They're 4 years old. It's probably too late for their generation. If I'm being honest with people, I'm talking about building a new paradigm, a new system that could give my kids a chance at a better world. This is a long-term thing at this point. That's why I don't get too hung up on what is feasible right now, because the short-term here and now is looking very, very bleak, if I'm being honest with how I feel about this, right? So that's why I give a lot more credence to ideas like defund the police, prison abolition, right? Things like that, because the way I'm thinking is we're going to have to build completely new structures that can implement these things, not next year, not in 10 years, not in 20 years, in 50 years. I'm not talking about saving myself or even my kids at this point. This is about my grandkids. And so that's why I think it's important to talk about those things. Even though I fully concede that everything you're saying makes total sense. And yes, in Angela Davis's case, look, when the opportunity came to actually fight for real, meaningful change in the short term, where was she? She was nitpicking Bernie Sanders on this and this issue. So she wasn't down for the cause. Not really, not when it counted. So I'm not saying what I'm saying to defend her. I'm just telling you where I'm coming from in terms of how I view those kinds of ideas.
Keaton.
Yeah.
Do you think those people at University of Pennsylvania want a radical redistribution?
No, they're pieces of shit. They're pieces of garbage. So nobody has more contempt for those people than I do.
Why do you
preach to
think,
the choir?
So why is she talking about that with them?
I'm not defending her, but I just told you. I just said.
Because she wants to
Of course.
convert them to communism.
No, of course not. But I never claimed that. No, of course not.
You know, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. The reason Bernie's campaign took off was because he was talking about things that touched the lives of ordinary people who, exactly as he said, have no future.
Exactly.
And are just, he's opening up a possibility.
Sure.
Oh, he was.
He was, not now. You're not going to get people to come, ordinary people to come out to hear about about abolishing prisons. It has nothing to do with their lives. Yes,
of course, I understand.
Yes, they have friends, relatives in prison. But what they're concerned about, if they have friends, relatives in prison, is how do you meet the legal fees of paying for a lawyer? That's a very big problem to anybody. I've been in jail, so I know about things like that. How do you pay for the legal fees? How do you fill out a appeal and pay for an appeals lawyer? Very, very expensive. Prison abolitionism, it's just complete fantasy. It's Wizard of Oz. And that's why she gets invited in the first place, because she's not talking. It was
Exactly.
The most striking thing in the 2016 and 2020 campaigns, the primary campaigns, if you were to ask me to pluck from the book the most striking insight of the book, it was that the most woke precincts, New York Times, MSNBC,
Oh, sure, yeah.
most woke precincts were also the most anti-Bernie precincts. It reached the point where Bernie got a much better reception in Fox News than he did in MSNBC.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
That is the secret. That's why she gets invited. That's why she's a hot ticket item on Martha's Vineyard. As I said in the book, when I was growing up, Angela Davis was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
Yes.
Now she's on Martha Vineyard's 5 most coveted list. Because
Well, I'm not denying that when she talks about these things, she means it as a distraction from immediate class politics goals. I would concede that fully. But I'm saying there are also, in my experience, talking to a lot of serious working class people, black people, our friends over at RBN, talk about prison abolition, defund the police all the time. I think they're very serious about talking about that as an aspiration, as a world to envision. And I think it's important to have that.
I guess what? I mean, I don't want to get into a tit for tat here.
No, it's fine. I'm agreeing with just about everything you're saying.
I
It's
think
just
it was Shakespeare who said, money is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
Okay? I think it was Shakespeare. I'm not positive on that.
Yeah.
You can check. So let's have a talk about how to abolish money. I mean, I think it's the same thing. It's completely, if we agree money is the root of all evil, then we should have extensive seminar discussions and public meetings at Harvard and elsewhere. Let's have a talk, chaired by Angela, how to abolish money. Money's the root of all evil. I think it's true. Money is the root of all evil. I have no problem concurring with that proposition. So then let's have Angela speak on a night on abolishing money. What does that have to do with anything? I knew a lot of black African-American activists, black activists, whatever. And they were involved in police brutality issues for 40 years. My old friend, Lawrence Hem from New Jersey, he heads up an organization, People Organized for Progress, POP. He's been at it for 50 years, half century, literally half century. And when the whole George Floyd phenomenon began, he had a very clear-cut demand. It was end the legal super status of cops, the 48-hour rule and all the other super status. It was a concrete demand. wasn't sexy, like abolish the police, not defund the police. It was a very concrete, clear demand. That's what radicals do. They assess what is the most practical, realizable, but also the maximum we can extract at a particular moment. That's what makes for a good demand. The maximum you can extract, which is also realizable, because everybody knows if you start making the demands which have no possibility of realization, you lose people. There's a handful of people who you could say are going to be there for every rally, every demonstration to the end of their lives. Okay? That's a handful of people. But most people, if you're consistently putting forth demands that have no possibility of realization, they're not going to come out anymore. You might happen to remember that the George Floyd demonstrations they're reported to be the biggest mass demonstrations in American history. Now, after George Floyd, in case you don't remember, there were a large number of police killings which imitated in fundamental ways what happened or replicated what happened to George Floyd. There were virtually no demonstrations. You know why? Because people went out to 6 weeks, nothing came of it, and so people walked away thinking, waste of time. And then on top of the lack of results, then there were all the revelations about the corruption, all of the so-called leaders of Black Lives Matter who... Right.
Wasn't it also that the Democratic Party, with an election coming up, put out the signal that they didn't want to hear any of the defund the police talk? And that really depressed those movements? I think that was a big factor. Right?
Sorry, that's what the Democratic Party wanted. And then it is true that the woke precincts like the Times were all behind the defund the police. And that when it was time to lower the temperature, they got less coverage. That's true.
Right.
But that wouldn't explain why people, including myself, I didn't go out the next time because I didn't believe, based on the first experience, number one, I didn't believe the demands that were being put forth were realizable. And number two, I had become a little cynical, as did many people, that a lot of these demonstrations were being manipulated by race hustlers who were making out very nicely. Tamika Mallory ended up making commercials for Cadillac. Patrice Cullors purchased 4 homes. She was asked, why did you purchase 4 homes? She says, I was doing it for Black people.
Yeah.
Which Black people you were doing it for? He said, for my son,
right.
or my mother. So I thought to myself, so when the Saudi king, he buys homes for his 40 wives, he's doing it for Arab people. Now I get it. He's not doing it for himself. He's doing it for Arab people. These are all scams. So there was a real stench left behind by those George Floyd demonstrations. And I think that if you want to get people to keep coming out, you have to make demands that are realizable. Now, they may not be realized in the first day or the 10th day or the 20th day. Remember, people forget Montgomery bus boycott. These are the most down and out people on American earth. It was people who were in a state of the Jim Crow racism. It wasn't slavery, but actually it wasn't much better either. It took a year. That's forgotten. People had to get up in the cold of winter at 4 o'clock to walk to work or carpools to get to work. And it was a very arduous struggle. So I'm not saying that you're going to get instant results, but you have to choose demands which are realizable You know, and I know, defund the police wasn't realizable. And frankly, I don't think it was particularly desirable unless you have an alternative ready when something happens and you don't have 911 anymore. You have to tell people, what are you going to put in its place?
Well, in a lot of respects, isn't this by design? I mean, it's all of a piece. They've elevated very unserious people like Kendi
totally agree.
to these positions of authority. And so there was nobody to really organize this the way King did, the way Malcolm did, into something tangible and real. All you had were hustlers jumping out in front.
Right, there was no organization.
Beyond that, there was just an overall climate of despair between the collapse of the Bernie campaign and the pandemic and the lockdowns and an election between Biden and Trump. I mean, it was just a very hopeless time.
I don't really agree with that. You know, Keaton, we're free to disagree and agree where we agree.
For sure.
Bernie, yes, disappointment. But young people were ready to come out again because it was the same people who went for Bernie who went for Black Lives Matter.
Of course, but that's my point. That's why that energy.
Right. So you had a second chance. There was a second wind to the movement. Remember, Bernie's main
the Democrats crushed that one too. That's what I'm saying. They crushed both. They crushed Bernie, and then they put out the signal, no, these demands are no good. We have to shut up, otherwise Trump is going to win. I think a signal came down from on high to crush both movements, crush the Bernie movement and crush the George Floyd protest movement.
The problem is the woke people pretend not to be acting at the behest of the Democratic Party, but to be spokespersons for the masses of people. So you could have whatever directive you get from the Democratic Party leadership, you could have continued the demonstrations and had realizable demands. But that's not what these people are about, the woke people.
I agree with you.
They're integral to the Democratic Party. They follow orders. Yes. How the order is to support Biden, come what may, no criticism allowed. Even on issues where any sane person, you don't have to support Vladimir Putin, but certainly if you don't, you could still raise questions about the war in Ukraine. There's not a question. I mean, there's not a question.
Of course.
Giving $100 billion to an army, which includes quite a large number, I'm not saying the majority, but also not a trivial minority, quite a large number of dyed-in-the-wool Nazis. Yeah. Is it a very good idea to be giving, with no oversight, these weapons, to these people in the best case?
The most corrupt country in Europe. That money, according to Cy Hirsch, 400 million has been stolen.
In the best case scenario, they're going to sell it in the black market. In the worst case scenario, if it looks like Ukraine is losing the war, they're going to use these precision weapons to blow up a Russian nuclear reactor. That's not a happy thing. That's not a happy thought.
Not good.
Do these people raise any questions about the war in Ukraine? Nothing.
Not Bernie either. Not Bernie either.
Bernie's been horrible. Sometimes I walk the streets and I curse him. I do. I get so angry. He says, I trust Biden on the Ukraine.
Yeah,
I trust Biden. Can you tell me some foreign policy?
I hadn't even heard that, and I wish I hadn't.
Yeah, he was asked on the Ukraine specifically.
Oh, yeah, you did, Russell. We covered that segment.
He said,
I'm supportive of what Biden's doing. I trust him. Yeah.
He said, I don't know much about Ukraine. I don't know much about foreign policy, but I trust Biden's government.
Right.
Can you tell me something in Biden's foreign policy experience that gives you grounds for trusting his judgment? Was he great on the war in Vietnam? Was he great on Iraq? Was he great in Afghanistan?
He's been wrong every time.
He's been wrong on everything, along with his whole class.
He's been right about his class interest, the class interest he represents, but in terms of what Bernie's supposed to represent. So these people are just Democratic Party apparatchiks.
Right.
The woke people, because the expression, he who pays the piper calls the tune. It's a lot of money.
Yep.
That's one of I have to get off now because I have to have dinner. But one of the most remarkable things about the situation now is wealth has been so polarized in our society, and the rich have so much money that they can give it away in ways which were unthinkable in the past. I mean, unthinkable. You're way too young to remember, but there was this serial television program, a drama. It was called The Millionaire. And the plot of the film, of the drama, it was a weekly drama. The plot was a very rich millionaire named John Ferris Tipton, I think. And in each week, through his agent named Michael Anthony, who carried a little portfolio, and the portfolio carried a check for $1 million. And it would be given to some do-gooder, some obscure do-gooder who, because of his or her good deeds, would get the check. And we, as we watched the program, it was like, oh my God, $1 million. It was a thought that couldn't be conceived. You get that? A thought that couldn't be conceived. $1 million. You flash forward to the present. Jeff Bezos, he gives Barack Obama not $1 million, not $10 million. He gives Barack Obama a check, $100 million. Van Jones, the former CNN commentator, maybe he still is, I don't know, I don't watch television. He gives him a check, $100 million. Then Jack Dorsey gives Kendi $10 million. You know, these sums are so astronomical. And as you know, human nature being what it is, very hard to resist that sort of money. Now, you know, and I know, what side, if and when, maybe not next week, maybe not next month, maybe not next year, but sooner or later, there's going to be a national strike of Amazon. Okay, it's got to come. You know, and I know, which side will Barack Obama be on?
Oh, yeah, no, of course.
Which side will Van Jones be on? That's a no-brainer, you know. So, these apparatchiks, these woke apparatchiks, who are basically very untalented, Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, not the brightest lights on the circuit, not the sharpest tools in the shed, and so much money. I think Robin DiAngelo sold something like 11 million copies of White Fragility. I remember there was a British commentator who said, White Fragility is the worst book ever written on any subject.
All right, Norm, before you go, can I ask you one last question, because you're a very unique guest to ask this. We don't often have academics on the show, and this is purely about what's going on in academia. Would that be all right?
Yeah.
All right. So you're probably aware that Ron DeSantis has made driving wokeness, quote unquote, out of both the public schools and the public universities in Florida a number one priority of his administration. In addition to legislation recently introduced, which would ban the teaching of, quote, theories that systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege are inherent in the institutions of the United States and were created to maintain social, political, and economic inequities, unquote, in general education courses, although not in advanced electives. He's also defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion departments and hires. And he's made New College, which is part of the University of Florida system, a kind of test case in reforming education. Now, another effort to unwoke higher education is the University of Austin, It's being led in part by Barry Weiss, who you're probably not a fan of, and Peter Boghossian. They plan to open their doors to undergrads beginning in 2024. Their curriculum follows a more traditional vision of classical education. The first 2 years are going to be liberal arts courses, whereas DeSantis is very skeptical of programs that don't have an obvious career path. What do you think about these efforts? Do you support both, either, or neither?
Listen, it's the same thing we talked about at the beginning of the program, where the provocations come from the woke culture, and then the right wing capitalizes on them. Had serious scholarship been produced on the subjects you refer to that DeSantis wants to defund, I think he would have had a much more difficult time. During the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings, Ted Cruz, who's a pathological pervert, there's no doubt in my mind about it. No, he did. He is. I mean, he used all of his time to grill Ketanji Brown Jackson on why she was soft on pedophiles. Now, Ketanji Brown Jackson, did you see her? A woman of immense dignity, great, serious academic pedigree. Did she look to you like a pedophile fan club member? It was so.
I wouldn't know what they look like.
I know, it's so ill. I mean,
yeah, maybe Ted Cruz. Yeah.
I know. I said to my class, if there was a lineup of perverts, and the lineup consisted of two people, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Ted Cruz, who would you choose? That's a no-brainer. So why do I bring it up? You might think, what the hell is he talking about? Because Ted Cruz, when he was denouncing woke culture, he holds up Ibram X. Kendi's anti-racist baby. I'm thinking to myself, well, he's got a point. He says that it shouldn't be on the curriculum. It shouldn't be on the curriculum. It should not be on the curriculum. So, of course, I'm against state legislatures making these decisions. I think they should be, the whole principle of tenure, or one of the two principles of tenure, is that only people who are competent in your area or discipline should be making decisions as to your competence to teach. So these are decisions that should be left to, as it's called, the disciplines, okay? And I don't think state legislatures should be involved in that process. As a matter of, what do you know about these disciplines? You don't know. In general, of course, I'm against that. But on the other hand, you made it very easy for them with your diversity, equity, and inclusion apparatchiks, your idiotic books. I mean, a lot of schools assign white fragility. They do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They assign stamped from the beginning. They do. And so you made it very easy for the right wing to exploit the situation for a transparent political agenda. I have no doubt about that. DeSantis is an extremely smart guy. He went to Yale, he went to Harvard and then Yale, I can't remember which, and he was also a first-rate athlete. He was captain of his football team. He's an impressive fellow. He's not stupid. It's obviously he's capitalizing on it. He's running with it. But you didn't have to hand it to him on a silver platter. If you had serious scholars producing serious scholarship, okay, there may have been some attempts. I kind of think that they would have been marginal if you had, it was very hard to diminish the stature of Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was a very serious scholar. So even though the Republicans, like Ted Cruz, was completely bizarre. what he was doing. All he talked about was her. She was too lenient to pedophiles, as if she's a pedophile. It's crazy. Her parents are in the audience. It must have been, and her children are in the audience. It must have been totally mortifying. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about, Ted? So if you had presented people like that, it would have been, I think it would have made it more difficult for those sorts of exploitations by the right wing. And I do not believe they would have gotten very far. It's that you handed it to them on a silver platter with these completely, as I said, these lunatic propositions which you are forced to accept or otherwise denounced as X, Y, or Z. That opened the door. I think it's, as I said, I don't want to reiterate it because we're at the end of the time, but there were many things where reasonable people could say, we don't agree. We just don't agree, but you weren't allowed to not agree. Right. So you created a backlash, which was then exploited. So no, I don't believe there should be state interference in those sorts of decisions. Just like I think librarians should be making decisions about what books are purchased by the local library. Most librarians, I don't know now, I hope not, but most librarians take their calling very seriously. And unfortunately, they don't order books anymore because people only go to the library to use computers. But there was a time where you could trust in the judgment of a librarian. They were readers, real readers, and they took their calling seriously. So I would have said, I think librarians should make those decisions about what books to order for the library. And just as I would say, I think faculties should make decisions about what books to order for schools. But I have to say, number one, this wokeness plague, this wokeness contagion has spread so far that I'm not entirely confident anymore that librarians will make the right decisions. I'm not entirely confident that certain disciplines at universities will be making the right decisions. And I also of the opinion that you made it very easy for the right wing to exploit this. So that's how I see it.
All righty. Well, Norman Finkelstein, the book is called I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, available now. It was great to meet you, sir, and thank you so much for making time. Can people buy those T-shirts or no? Are those for sale?
Is that one of a kind?
Is that one of a kind?
Made it for me.
Is that print on demand? Oh, that's right.
I have the hammer and sickle on the back. I don't think, even if it were on the front, it would mean anything to anyone anymore. But
we have a lot of people who are fond of that symbol. In our
I know Keaton wants me back next week to talk about prison abolitionism, and then Russell wants me back the week after to talk about the abolition of money.
There's so much stuff we didn't get to because your book is so long.
I don't know why Angela and Ibram and all the rest have these astronomical speaking fees when they also support the abolition of money.
Well, they got to get it while it's here.
That's the grift.
They got to get it before it goes out of style, you know. It's like a limited edition, you know, watch, right? You got to get it before they start making it, I guess. 50,000 a speech. Great to meet you, Norman. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Okay, and I am deeply moved, and I'm going to immediately report back to everyone. I was on a podcast today where there were two interlocutors, and each of them read one page of my book.
Yes, that's right. We made.
I've been reading your book for a week and a half.
And you finished one page.
Yeah, right. Made it through.
Okay, guys. So nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. Thank you, Norman. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Norman Finkelstein, everybody.
All right. So I hope that was everything everybody hoped for. We had a really interesting question about Holocaust hustlers that we never got to, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a
that
lot
was my next question on deck.
Yeah, some stuff we did not get to, indeed. But yeah, no, it was a great talk. I mean, Norman is obviously a very, very bright and entertaining and unpredictable guy, and so that's kind of what we go for here. And so, yeah, no, it was a great talk. Yeah.
Keaton joked this was going to be like 3 generations of the same guy. So,
yes, 3 generations of the
did
same
you all
guy.
feel that way?
The young, right? Exactly. Yeah, like it was basically a time machine. What we just saw,
this was like one of those Picard Star Trek episodes where you have them at different stages. That went over Keaton's head, but I know we have enough geeks that'll get that.
Indeed, I'm sure we do. All right, let's take some super chats, shall we, from the audience here. Here we go. Patrick Donahue from the very beginning. 3 Jews all for the rights of Palestinians as human beings. Yes, when there's little hope in the world, seeing this warms the heart. A better, more equitable world is possible. Keep the faith, comrades, indeed.
Thank
you know, he when it comes to the prison abolition stuff and the defund the police stuff, I mean, I think I made this fairly clear while we were talking. You know, I'm coming at that from a place of despair, from a place of the battle has already been lost. So, like, what we're talking about in terms of what's realistic tomorrow, nothing is realistic. You can't get paid family leave tomorrow, right? You're not getting anything tomorrow. We're not getting anything in the short term. Nothing.
See, me, I didn't want to, because it was already like, yeah, we had so many questions to get to. I didn't want to cut in too much.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel more like, and I touched on that a little bit. I didn't want to monologue about it though. Yeah, I feel like it went with everything we were talking about. By the time you get to the George Floyd protests, now, you know, I'm not one of these conspiracy theorists. A lot of our communist friends, and hey, maybe they're right, honestly. There was a lot of talk by the CIA in the 70s about how to defang the left by directing it into, you know, inconsequential pathways. Is that really what happened here? I suspect that's part of it, but I think it's also a confluence of interests. What is it? What is that quote you always pull out? There's no conspiracy required.
Yeah, George Carlin. Some right winger accused him of being a conspiracy theorist, and he says you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge.
Yeah, so I think there probably was some deep state guiding and pushing and prodding in this direction, but you also had every reason for corporate and state powers to openly support this ideology, to promote people like Kendi, to promote mental midgets like DiAngelo, to promote people like Ta-Nehisi Coates, which we had a question about, but we never got to it. Because, yeah, I mean, it served the purpose of keeping us all fighting each other over unresolvable questions. And the fact that they picked academics whose vision basically is a world of irreconcilable differences rather than reconcilable differences, that serves everybody's purpose. It keeps us from getting together and fighting a class war. And for the people who promote these ideas like Kendi, that's their hustle, man. They don't want these things resolved. They want you angry. They want you pissed off so they can sell you books and charge $100,000 a speech. You know, I mean, that's what it's about. So I think by the time you get to the George Floyd protests, man, there's no intellectual leadership for anything like that. Everybody's been infected by an ideology that's completely self-defeating and makes it impossible to come up with a meaningful and realistic agenda. Like, all of that has fallen apart already by the time you get there. I think that is a big part of why it ended up that way, because you didn't have a King. You didn't have a Malcolm by design, because they promoted these morons who are going to give you a lot of gobbledygook that doesn't even make any sense on the face of it, except if your aim is to make sure that everyone's completely confused and in a constant state of paranoia and hatred.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. And I also think, not to repeat what we said in the talk, but obviously you had the collapse of the Bernie campaign. Then you had this horrible thing happen on camera where a guy gets choked to death under the knee of some murderer cop. And then you had all this radical energy bubble up. And then what happened? It was time for campaign season. It was time for election season. And the Democrats couldn't have everybody in the streets chanting defund the police. So they said, well, no, we can't do that. And then that's when the protests started dying down. If you look at the timeline, it matches that timeline pretty much exactly, which is what Norm was saying. And he's absolutely right that the left has been co-opted into the Democratic Party, such that once the left, no matter how radical they appear to be, once they get the sense that their radicalism is going to be a liability to the Democratic Party, they tone down the radicalism.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, look, there were two crowds who were saying
that wouldn't have happened in the past because you had real leadership.
Right. Exactly.
You don't have any real leadership, and that's by design.
Exactly.
The last time black people had leadership in this country, they whacked them. Right. They're not going to allow a real leader to rise. Kendi, they'll let him live to be 100.
Exactly.
The fuck's he going to do?
Abiding, thanks for the 99 cents. Appreciate that. Ellen is a member, so she's at the tier where she gets permanent super chat status. DD, I'd be curious to hear the professor's thoughts on 1619.
I mentioned that in passing.
We kind of lumped that in with the other stuff, so I hope that was to your satisfaction there, because that was part of that was part of your question that you had written down in advance. Thank you, Ellen. Franklin, thank you for the $4.99. Didn't wokeness obviously take over after it became clear the Democrats didn't want to improve material conditions, but still wanted to sound virtuous? Well, I had a question for Norm about his Obama passage, which was the third and final page of his book that I actually read. Which I had a passage from his book here, where he called here. I might even have it here because I prepped it. Is this it? Which is it? No, that was, I had two. It says Obama was the reducto ad absurdum of identity politics, in the sense that the part I highlighted there, what exactly did Obama stand for? Why cast your vote for him? He was what he stood for. He was the message and the messenger all at once. His campaign slogan, "Yes, we can," prompted the question, "Yes, we can what?" His answer wasn't long in coming. "Yes, we can elect me." End of story. I think Obama,
and that's a brilliant way to put it.
Yes, yeah. And I think Obama really did usher in the golden age of identity politics, because he not only represented an identity that the country wanted to embrace, especially at that time, but I think in another sense, when we talk about identity politics, you're talking about also sort of assuring, and there's a word I'm looking for that I can't find. I know what it is. It's on the tip of my tongue. Acknowledging, realizing, these are all the wrong words, but they're close enough. People's identity in terms of how they view themselves, right? Validating how we feel. Yes, affirming our own identities as good people. And I think the election of Barack Obama came 7 years after 9/11, when obviously in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, you had this real just groundswell of patriotic sympathies and signaling and things like this, where even the most hardcore leftists, my dad, who joins the chat quite often, he's pretty much a communist. He put the American flag on his car after 9/11, right? We all felt so proud of our country, and then George Bush took all that patriotism and goodwill and just squandered it and wasted it, to the point where this was true of almost all liberals, but don't forget, George Bush left office with a 22% favorability rating. The country was desperate to feel good about itself again. Right. And so electing Obama, the act of electing Obama, "Yes, we can elect me," became a way for the country to feel good about itself again, proud of itself again. The liberals were like, oh, what a way to atone for the sin of 2 Bush terms. What better way to make up for that than to elect a black man named Barack Hussein Obama, right? It felt good. And it was important in that sense. My family canvassed for Obama. I was working. I had a stupid retail job at the time, so I was working on Election Day 2008, but my family was in South Philly canvassing. And they said, as the race was called for him, you had people in the ghettos of South Philly with no reason to be proud of this country at all, right? Countries just completely screwed them over in every possible way. You had people chanting USA, USA in the street, right? Because they had elected Obama. They had done it. I'm not saying that wasn't important. It was important, but it obviously was insufficient to address the crises of the time, both foreign policy and obviously here at home. That was 6 weeks after the financial crisis hit. So Obama's election was, as he said, it's the reducto ad absurdum of identity politics because he was the cause. He was the cause.
That's it. Electing him was the end.
Right.
And that I saw him in a kind of lecture where he said basically the aim of identity politics is for black people to be 13% of the 1%. And Obama emblemizes that as well as anybody. What did he do when he got out of office? He went to help needy people, went to the inner cities to educate. No, he went windsurfing with Richard Branson.
Right.
That's what he did. Right.
As Trump was taking office. Right. When the Titanic hit the iceberg and, oh my God, the thing we were supposed to be so terrified about. Did Barack Obama take to the streets? Did he join the fucking, what was it? The Women's March and then the Climate March and then the Science March and the Tax March. All these marches for all the different causes. Was he at a single one of those? No. He was vacationing.
And then you have Trevor Noah.
He was house shopping out on Martha's Vineyard.
And then you have Trevor Noah does this fucking monologue explaining basically, well, this is what they all do. So if you want him to do it too, fuck you. Why should a black president be the one to be better than that? That was basically his argument. And all the libs went,
oh, that's true. That's true.
They loved it. They loved it. They passed that around. They shared it on social media. They loved that. They loved that monologue.
We didn't get to this question either. My dad wanted me to ask Norm how much acid he did, but in an approving way. Right. Sorry, I didn't get to that one.
Would have been interesting.
We only got to, I think we had 10 questions. I think we asked four or five.
I mean, if I was going to ask one more, I had to ask the college one because he's an academic. Like that's
right.
He's uniquely in a position to answer that.
To answer it exactly. Saul, thanks for the $10. We appreciate that. All right, so then my dad wanted me to ask. All right, here's how you do it. Talk about music, ask him his favorite bands, no matter what he says, far out trippy, and then ask how much he did acid to do with who he is today. Maybe for next time when he comes on again. Franklin, thanks for the $1.99. Is that ironic that Antifa are fascists? I've seen a lot of the Antifa guys at the different rallies and protests that I attended, especially when I lived in New York City. I used to go to quite a few of them. And, look, they get up there with the bandana. And, yeah, their goal is at these organizations to make people feel uncomfortable, right? They are provocateurs in that sense. I've run into them. But I've never felt actually threatened by a single one of them. And no one...
but you've never been to Portland.
Well, you're talking about in the aftermath of the George Floyd thing. But in my experience, they've been quite harmless. I mean, I could say that in fairness. I've run into a lot of Antifa at these, various events. Never did they hurt anyone. Never was there a physical confrontation. At worst, one of the counter protesters would come because there's always a small sort of, counter protest sort of contingent at a lot of the events they show up at. And in worst case, they'll come up and they'll get in each other's faces for a little bit. In my experience, I can't speak to every experience, obviously, but in my experience, I've never even seen a physical confrontation between Antifans and really whoever else was giving them shit. Tusker, thanks for the $50. Wow, that's very generous.
Tusker.
Oh, you got to get the thing there, the singing bowl. It's a $50 donation.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's what she did it for.
Yeah.
She loves that singing bowl.
Tusker asked us to interview Norm, so I'm glad you liked it. Thank you very much.
Those street urchins who sold me that could never have imagined the way that singing bowl would be used.
How do I become a Jew? Is it still to be one? Ask one. Oh yeah, I mean, look, you can convert. We can give you some literature.
You gotta look. I'll meet you at 42nd and 8th. There's an alley there.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and just bring your foreskin. I'll bring the scissors.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Snip.
Yeah,
one of the chosen people.
Boom. They whacked him 4 times. We lost. I'm assuming you're talking about. That was 8 minutes ago. But are you talking about the leadership, the left leadership that Russell was talking about, absent from this incarnation. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. Probably. And yes, you are right.
The Kennedyism. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. All right, everybody. Is that our show for the evening? I believe that is. I believe that's all we got. A simple show tonight.
See, that would have been really funny to get into. I didn't even write that question. I know we have a lot of RFK Jr. stands. He's not a fan of his dad. He basically sees him as an opportunist who spent his whole life working with McCarthy and working with the CIA, who opportunistically jumped in to the 1968 race, planning on running to the left of Johnson.
You know, there's some RFK news that we are going to cover on Thursday. Obviously, he just did an interview with Breaking Points. They teased out a little clip of it tonight. But RFK is actually going to speak at the virtual the virtual United for East Palestine Common Sense forum that they're putting on May 21st. So good on him for doing that. The guys from that event are going to be on here to plug it on Thursday. So we'll learn more about that. We'll have more information for you guys.
We got him. We got him.
Yes, they're in for Thursday. He says he never flew a flag. Yes, you did. I remember very, very specifically. You put an American flag on the, back in the day, they used to have the radio antennas that were, would come up sort of like from the corner of the windshield, so you could get the AM, FM radio. They don't have those on the cars anymore, but they used to.
No.
You put an American flag on one of those. I remember specifically. Yes, you did.
That was in my neighborhood. If the fight got real ugly, you'd snap that off the car and you'd beat the guy with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, our people are too keyed in to keep that a secret. Yeah. So for everybody who has this fantasy that there's going to be like a dirty break, yeah, Kennedy did an interview with Breaking Points where Crystal asked him quite clearly what he would do if he doesn't win. And he did the standard, I'm in it to win it, basically. And when pressed, he said he has no plan B. So there you go.
No dirty break.
Straight from the horse's mouth.
Now, listen, what he did say, just to be fair to everybody, he did say he can't imagine endorsing someone who supports the war in Ukraine. So he might not endorse that. He might not endorse Biden. But let me just because I've had the chance to make this clear a few different times on the show, and Anis Shivani, who we had on the show last week, actually messaged me about this after the show, and I don't think I've ever said this on the air. The bar for me to be satisfied when it comes to a candidate running in a Democratic primary is not simply declining to endorse Biden in the fall. That does not clear the hurdle. Yeah. What clears the hurdle for me, and I think I've said this, maybe I did say this in response to a super chat, is in order for a candidate to have my support in a Democratic primary, what they must pledge up front is not only will they not endorse Biden for the fall, but that they will take whatever movement they get going through their campaign, they will take that movement and actively weaponize it against the Democratic Party. That would be satisfactory to me.
Also,
anything less than that is not. So if RFK loses and he says, well, in good conscience, I can't endorse Biden, so I'm going back home and I'll see you guys next year. That does not cut it for me. No.
I also want an investigation into whether Papa John's is actually pizza.
Right. That's his other terms. So anyway,
I'm the voter. You have to meet me where I am.
Right. Got to meet him where he is. Got to negotiate with the voters. Alrighty. So that is everything for tonight. We will be back here on Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, and then again this Sunday. So you got a bonus stream this week, thanks to the great Norman Finkelstein. We appreciate him coming here and spending some time with us. We appreciate you all being here as well. Thank you very much for that. Let's put the Patreon scroll up here before we leave. You can go to patreon.com/DueDissidence and support this program. We had a couple different signups within the last 24 hours. I have not had a chance to update the scroll yet because this is just a special stream we put together. But the scroll will be up to date by the next regularly scheduled live stream, which is Thursday at 8 p.m. So I can shout out our new patrons here since I didn't add you to the scroll yet. I'll shout them out manually here. Rebel Seer, David D, as he likes to go by, Chris E, Aaron K, and then we had a couple other sign-ups that are brand new. I'll give you guys a shout-out here. I'll check this on my phone here. Liana signed up at 8 o'clock this evening, right as we went live, so thank you, Liana. We appreciate that. And then we also had another one. Where's that other one? Where's the other one? Where's the other one? Where's the other one? Oh, man. Get so much email these days at the DueDissidence. Yes, Christophilakis. Thank you for signing up. You guys will be on the scroll for Thursday. We appreciate that very much. You can go to patreon.com/DueDissidence to support the show. Also, DueDissidence.substack.com. Or you could become a member right here on YouTube. Next to that subscribe button, you will see a join button. You can get the little star next to your name on all the chats. Get a sort of super chat smorgasbord situation going for yourself, an all-you-can-eat buffet super chat package in one of the tiers for those of you guys who usually buy sort of do a sort of a la carte super chat thing. If you think it's worth your while to donate a bundle so you can get super chat status, you could do that. Members only posts, all kinds of things. You'll see the descriptions when you click there. But if you do sign up through YouTube, it really just helps us keep the show going and add streams like this. Like I said, the more
if you're upstate, Keaton will deliver a pizza to your house, not Papa John's.
Yeah, right. No, real pizza. I've been finding some good pizza up here, thankfully. But yeah, the more this is okay. So the thing about living this far from New York City, because I've never lived this far from New York City. I've always been in the New York metro area. I lived 60 miles north, but then I lived in the city for a while. When you live in the Hudson Valley, you're close enough to New York City where you can assume the pizza is going to be good. Is it going to be as great as some of the best city pizza?
Man, I went
maybe
to school
not.
There, it was all right.
No, hold on.
It wasn't like on.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Inedible.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Hudson Valley. In the Hudson Valley, where I'm from, that's not up here.
Oh, I see.
60 miles north of the city, you can assume the pizza is going to be good.
Right.
Up here, as you were just saying, you can't make that assumption. Up here, it's hit and miss. That's not to say there's not good pizza to be found up here, but you can't just assume when you walk into a pizzeria and you say, give me 2 slices, you can't assume it's going to be real deal pizza.
I mean, when I was there, it's a long time
here.
ago. I never had pizza there that could match city pizza. I had pizza that was edible. It wasn't like pizza you get in some places. Like, it was all right. Like, I could eat it, but it wasn't like good pizza.
No, I found a place that is, like a decent, like you said, just like a decent kind of standard New York slice. I have found that. But up here, you're right. We are far enough north where it's not a given that the pizza is going to be good. Whereas the Hudson Valley, you're still in that zone where you can assume pizza's pizza. Up here, you can't.
Yeah.
Up here, you don't quite know what you're getting, so you have to take it a little bit more seriously.
You know what? I'm going to take this, even though it's not super chat. Maybe because this keeps coming up. Is that enforceable? Like when we talk about the dirty break, a lot of people bring up this loyalty pledge you have to sign.
No,
is that enforceable? It's not enforceable, right?
What are they going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a freedom of speech issue.
It's a free country. You're allowed to run. I mean, who enforceable under what? What? The DNC says it's the law. What are they going to do? Jail you for running as an independent?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I think it's just like, it's a thing they make you sign, but it has no legal stand.
It's unenforceable, right? It's like most of these non-compete agreements.
It's something. If you broke it, they would go on MSNBC having the vapors and do the whole Mean Girls thing. He signed a pledge. Oh my God! Did you see?
You
Go
just
home and get your fucking shine box.
That's what you tell them to do with their fucking loyalty pledge.
That's
Exactly. Let's see here. We just got a wonderful membership here. Moriokiri. I hope I'm getting that name right. You signed up at the Coddler level, which is wonderful. Thank you so much. We appreciate that very, very much. That is very kind of you. It really does help us tremendously.
Give us your address. One of us will come coddle you.
Yeah, exactly. It really does help tremendously. No, I have to be a stickler for this. I have a very good memory for these things. I remember it was after 9/11 you put the flag on the car. I'm 100% sure of that. 100% sure of that. It's all right. You don't have to be ashamed of it. Everybody was doing it. Everybody was doing it. But
It was the thing.
Now, you did not put the support the troops yellow ribbon on the car. That you didn't. But you did put an American flag. I remember that very, very clearly. All right.
Why do you hate our troops?
Why do you hate America and our troops? All righty.
Fucking Putin puppets.
Yeah, right, exactly. You guys are exhausting. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you all being here. We will see you all on Thursday at 8 p.m., less than 48 hours away. See, look at the time we're putting in. Less than a 2-day turnaround here before we see all you wonderful people again. In the meantime, of course, Patreon, Substack, subscribe to this channel, like this stream, and we will see you Thursday. Until then, of course, be safe and be well.
Courage.
Please clap.